The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 1191. All from the same planet? Pass the popcorn, dear, said Noo, looking at her lovely little granddaughter. Layla, who was slightly distracted, handed her grandmother an empty bucket. Everyone in the room looked at each other. They all knew why she was distracted, but it couldn't be helped. This was the first time that they, as a family, were taking a vacation together. Previously, even the thought of taking a vacation was inconceivable. Their world was at war against zombies, and the most likely scenario was that they would die fighting. Then the change happened, and the Farron family was caught up in rebuilding their world, so they sent Layla away so that she might have a semblance of a childhood. Indeed, a childhood she did have, and as expected from her she became a leader of countless children. Yet her ever-growing close association with a commoner with no future was worrying, so they pulled her back to Vegas Minima, where she resumed her cultivation path. Indeed, she was a genius, far surpassing even her parents. Her growth was rapid, and she executed near perfection in every technique she learned. In a mere 5 years, despite beginning cultivation prematurely, her foundation had grown so solid that despite their best efforts to prevent her realm from growing, she became a foundation realm cultivator. Yet while her cultivation grew, her personality diminished. She became quieter by the day, until she only spoke when spoken to, and even then her responses were minimal. She became the perfect, obedient child, and in the process lost all her individuality. When the Farron family learned that another Midnight Games were about to launch, they obviously knew they had to partake. That's when they learnt the phenomenal news that the flow of time in the inn was 3 times that of the origin realm. That meant while 5 years had passed for them, 15 years had passed inside the inn. That means that all the children she used to play with were adults, and any attachment they may have had would be long gone. It went through a few more different contestants, and Layla was surprised to find that she had actually seen many of them around the inn at one point or another. For example, there was that guy Marlowe. He used to be very popular at the inn because he was always causing some problems. But now, after 5 years, he looked a lot bigger, as if he had put on a lot of muscle. She saw that Anakin Indiana McLean guy, who always looked like he wanted to cause trouble. From what she recalled, he had a group of friends as well. Before she could even complete the thought, she saw the rest of them. There was that samurai guy, who always carried a katana with him. Then there was Larry, who would always drool whenever he looked at the spaceship. Heck, she even saw that weirdo who always accused everyone of lying. Then she frowned for a minute. From what she recalled, weren't they all from the same planet? Wasn't that a lot of representatives from the same place? Before she could complete the thought, the narrator finally presented the most popular contestant, and the one to keep an eye on during the stream, Lex Dragonsbane. He looked familiar too. Before she could recall where she had seen him, the sound of shouting and screaming distracted her. She looked outside her window of their private booth, and saw countless people who were watching shouting as Lex came on screen. Even the workers were shouting. Quickly, the news spread. Apparently, Lex was a very popular worker at the inn, and if rumors were true, a very strong one at that. He also went by another name, Leo. Suddenly, a spark of interest flashed in her eyes as she looked towards the screen. The stream finally began, and the venue was shown. It was a graveyard for giants. Chapter 1192. Creatures of Flame. After taking care of his problems and returning to the hotel lobby, Lex was sent to the next round. He had also taken this break period to look into how long exactly these rounds would last. All of his plans were, more or less, coming together, but there was a catch. The longer he took to execute his plan, the more variables that came in, which meant there was a greater chance of something going wrong. In fact, Roland had already passed him certain news about Bank Versailles, which made the situation slightly complicated. He did not know the exact relationship between the Henali and the bank, but apparently the bank had sent someone over to mend the situation with the AI. Obviously that had nothing to do with Lex, but it had much to do with the Fugan, who were closely connected to the very people he was targeting. For now, this was not a bad thing, but the more time went by, the greater the chances that something could go amiss. so Lex felt the need to rush. But these things were not in his control. He needed to be calm when there was nothing he could do, but act decisively when he felt he could make a change. This was especially when he found out that the champions' tourney would be at least 10 years long, and the preliminary tournament was also expected to last a year. As he was teleported to his next trial, Lex almost resigned himself to the fact that this would take some time. That was fine. He would, in this time, help Moon build a connection to her planet and help her move to the inn. The search for Liz and Belle would be slowed down, but maybe being streamed live across the realm would help them find him instead. Lex cracked his neck and began to walk forward. He did not need to spread his spirit sense out to see that in the darkness, the abominations had already begun to rise. They hid in the shadows or bodies, and in corners and in pits and holes. They traveled through the wind, unseen and unheard, and attacked like assassins in the night. They were formless and shapeless, yet they were absolutely lethal. Fear and horror were their strengths, and they had no weaknesses in this place. Or at least, they did not until now. Slowly, a powerful aura began to spread from Lex's body, attracting the attention of not only all the abominations, but all the contestants as well. Everyone had been waiting for the first move. They wanted to see what the abominations could do. Since they would be here for months, they would first get a sense for the strength of their enemies, and then they would make their plans. Of course, if the others wanted to probe the abominations first, they would happily sit back and watch. But Lex had no intentions of probing. His right eye glowed with a red light as he used his new eye technique. But this time he was not using his eye to search for things, instead he was using a unique combination of glyphs and arrays to use his vision to control flames. Then, he opened his mouth and let loose dragon fire. Thick and roiling flames or yellow and orange suddenly illuminated the darkness, revealing all the hidden abominations for a split second before they burned to ash. The flames, under the control of his eye, began to take shape, and mythical creatures born of flames appeared before him. The aura his body gave off became stronger. Domination was no longer just the simple theft of dragon's might. It had been fueled and elevated using his own convictions, and it carried a weight like no other. Just like that, Lex started his massacre. Chapter 1193 His Limit. Far, far away from the preliminary tournament, and the champions' tourney, and even the known realm, there was a white dwarf. White dwarfs, basically, were just dead stars that hadn't blown up after their fires burned out, and instead cooled down. White dwarfs were not all that uncommon, and this one too would be nothing more than another lifeless piece of rock, no different from any other in the origin realm. Except that the 99 planets that orbited this white dwarf were all on fire, as if there were 99 stars orbiting a planet. The countless burning planets all around the white dwarf made it so that it experienced perpetual daylight, and experienced incredibly high temperatures, without actually being lit on fire. The unique circumstances around this dead star had been artificially created to serve a very particular purpose. It was an incubation planet, where dragons came and left their eggs, the ones from which they had particularly high expectations. It was also a kind of nursery for newborn dragons, where they would be trained in the absolute basics before being sent out into the origin realm to fend for themselves. Yet, on this day, this particular white dwarf was visited by someone other than a dragon. A devil appeared, not in her mundane humanoid form, but in her fully displayed devil form. Her purple skin was smooth and lustrous, and carried a certain charm that could entice the hearts of whoever laid eyes on it. Her two large wings were fully opened behind her back, as if she needed them to fly, and her long, slender tail swung gently behind her, like a dancing snake. "You are trespassing on dragon territory, devil," a voice boomed even in the vacuum of space, as a formerly invisible dragon revealed herself. Discover new stories at novelhall.com. Her scales were dark, like space itself, and seemed to bend light around it, helping her camouflage herself. The effectiveness of her scales was remarkable, considering the size of her body was so massive, that it hugged the entirety of the white dwarf. "1,000 pardon, mighty dragon," the devil said politely, a mischievous smile painting her enchanting face. "I have no ulterior motives. My name is Valerie, and I came here to claim a certain bounty." I have knowledge about where Dragon's Bane will be soon. Then Lex summoned his sword and looked at Naraka. A piece of him yearned to let loose, but then reluctantly he put the sword away. Finding a worthy foe for his sword had turned out to be more of a hassle than he imagined. But if there was ever a place he found a worthy enemy, it would be at the tourney. Instead, he summoned his recently acquired hammer. It was a pretty big, double-sided hammer that looked like it belonged to monsters of legend. Considering it had been used by an oversized minotaur, that actually ended up being true. What was more important, however, was that it granted Lex a boost in physical strength. Lex looked out in front, and noticed that his little warm-up had garnered a strong reaction from the abominations. Like a tide of darkness they were coming to smash down on him. Instead, wielding the hammer, Lex smashed down on the corpse in front of him. Yet the hammer never touched the corpse. Instead, space cracked under his mighty blow, and the cracks spread far and wide, before they began to quickly heal. Yet why would he let them heal? There was nothing in the description of this trial that said he couldn't destroy the whole graveyard itself, and that seemed like a much quicker way of killing all the abominations than killing them one by one. The tide of darkness crashed down, trying to stop him, but the flaming monsters came in their way. There was no darkness that could survive the light of dragonfire. Someone in the Discord said that the previous cliffhanger was criminal, so I took that as a challenge XD. Chapter 1194 One-Man Army I. Bang! Lex used the hammer to smash down on space itself right before him, causing it to crack. Yet the cracks also began to heal the very moment they were formed. This place was not like BGY 987, the planet where the Midnight Battalion had waited for him. There, the fabric of space had been frail and fragile, breaking easily. That was both a boon and a curse, for it made using destructive space techniques easier, and a curse because if he was not careful he would end up destroying a lot more than just space. But here, the laws of space were whole and healthy, and so as Lex tried to break space, space itself tried to resist and heal. Technically speaking, if Lex wanted to just create a small fracture in space he would not need to take such extreme measures. But his aim was far larger than a small fracture, which is why he was doing things in a much simpler and brutish fashion. He was forcing space to shatter over a large area. Bang! He smashed again, and as his hammer bore down, it was not just space that felt the tremors caused by his heavy blows. It was not even limited to the floor of corpses upon which he stood. No, the tremors of his blows spread to the hearts of all the other contestants who were around him, watching. They spread to the hearts of the abomination, who felt a lethal threat from his actions. The tremors shook the hearts and minds of all those who were streaming this fight, and even of those who were supposed to be overseeing things. Should we stop him? A worried, disembodied voice asked. No, the karma of this place needs to be resolved naturally. By bringing everyone here we are already pushing the limits of what that allows. Even if he destroys the very graveyard itself, that is also a resolution to the karma. Keep your eyes on the greater goal. Do not fret these small losses. Bang! The sound of Lex's hammer punctuated the end of their conversation. But Giselle had her own mission in this graveyard, so she stopped looking at Lex, and began her own slaughter. Oddly enough, even though she was incredibly lethal, and did a significant amount of damage to the abominations, no one noticed her. It was as if her moves were timeless. The Midnight Tavern was fuller than usual, considering that it had experienced a recent upgrade. The tavern owner had recently decided to triple the size of his building. Of course, he didn't add any more floors, but just took over the neighboring buildings, tore them down and expanded the tavern. No one minded, since the tavern was super popular anyway. Hey, little huntress, the tavern keeper said to the little girl covered in blood, despite looking quite pale herself. She had recently suffered a grave wound, and if it hadn't been for timely treatment administered by the tavern owner, she might have become a cripple. I heard you're in need of money lately, he continued, ignoring the blatantly obvious anger in her eyes. Someone had targeted her, and caused her to lose out a lot. He knew. How could he not know? He even knew what she wanted that money for, though he would never tell her. Yeah. So what? You accepting new kinds of beasts? It'll take me a couple of days to recover, but I can start hunting as soon as I can walk without limping. No, you silly girl. Hunters need to use their brains as well sometimes. Use the opportunity that is presented before you. What do you mean? She looked at him oddly. The tavern keeper only smiled, and pointed to the massive projection screen in the middle of the tavern bar. You have to figure that out for yourself. By the way, completely unrelated, but the tavern is accepting bets for who is going to win this tournament. I myself have placed my bets on that guy with the hammer. The huntress gave him an odd look. If the tavern is the one accepting bets, why are you placing bets? Hey, the tavern is the tavern, and I'm me. Anyway, you do what you want. Good luck with your money crisis. Chapter 1195 One-Man Army 2. A literal tide of darkness, formed from countless abominations shapelessly coming together to pool their strengths, crashed down on Lex. Yet the light of his furious fires kept the darkness at bay. It was an epic battle between light and darkness, a symphony of good and evil, a contest of power that transcended typical conventions, and in the middle of it all, a man working single-mindedly on his task. The steady rhythm with which he was smashing down his hammer gave the impression that he was nothing more than a blacksmith, forging something of mythic power as he harnessed the abstract chaos around him. The abominations had no shape or form to which they adhered. They were darkness, and within it they could be megalithic monsters, or an army of infinite individuals. Their very nature caused weakness and fear to spread, their body a poison that could kill mind and soul alike. Being in the very presence of an abomination diminished the strength and stature of those who could not handle it. Yet clearly, if it was not for their abundance, they would be worth nothing more than a minor irritation to Lex. It was not like his actions said that Dragonfire was weak. It was more like saying that if they could not even overcome his Dragonfire, why did they deserve any more attention from him? Instead, Lex focused on the task at hand, and continued to smash down on the space before him until there was finally a change. There were countless cracks right in front of him, and though they spread out far and wide, they all originated from this point. The concentration of cracks continued to rise, until eventually a small piece of space chipped, revealing the void underneath. Lex's eyes gleamed. Among the most powerful space attacks he learned, space warp and space unraveling were still the strongest. Space warp basically allowed Lex to manipulate space to cause fluctuations in gravity, while space unraveling literally undid space, and instead turned it into a highly concentrated, incredibly dangerous form of energy that even he could not tolerate even still. Despite killing so many abominations, there hardly seemed to be a dent in their endless numbers. No wonder this was expected to take months. He needed to come up with a faster way to kill all of them. For a moment, he paused and rubbed his chin as he thought about his options. He could give up his control over Dragonfire and let it spread unchecked. That's exactly what happened when he used Dragonfire for the first time, which was against the Tree of Heaven. But even if he assumed no immortals would put out his flames, it would still be too slow. What he needed to do was identify the abomination's greatest weakness, and then think of a way to create one or a number of overwhelming attacks that could influence the entire graveyard. He spent some time planning, and came up with a feasible idea. Ironically, the fastest way to clear this whole place of abominations required a long preparation time. Lex used his left eye to study the laws attached to the abominations. Specifically, he looked for their weaknesses. Conveniently, it seemed like their greatest weakness was yang energy, which was abundant in Dragonfire. Oddly enough, yang energy would also allow abominations to grow stronger, as the yang would nourish and strengthen them somehow. But the nature of how they received the energy is what would determine if they were annihilated or nourished. Lex immediately got to work. Although Lex had learned a lot about formations recently, he still preferred arrays. Especially after he learned to augment the results of arrays using glyphs, he managed to overcome that invisible threshold of power that he seemed to reach with his arrays. Not that it mattered right now. The array Lex began to design was not an attacking array to begin with, so the threshold of power didn't matter. Instead, the array would only facilitate the result he wanted, not cause it. Visit co/m for the latest updates. Chapter 1196 Purgatory. Lex's spirit sense spread out around the graveyard, over the abominations, and into the literal endless pile of corpses. His spirit sense traveled until it eventually reached the ground, which had hardened like one continuous piece of rock, and then went deeper. It also rose into the air, through the cloud of abominations and above it, searching for the actual sky. His left eye, especially, was activated far beyond what it had been in a long time as he studied the laws governing every aspect of this graveyard. He could see traces of what once was. He could see the decaying laws that usually accompanied a thriving populace and large nations. He could see how they had been eroded, over time, and eventually replaced by a dark desolation. Protected by his army of dragonfire creatures, Lex completely changed his focus to his surroundings, gaining a thorough and nuanced understanding of the graveyard that was out of reach at a simple glance. His purpose was simple. Lex had experienced many things and encountered unfathomable powers, but maintained a firm belief that the forces of nature were the strongest in existence. Natural disasters could literally change the topography of continents. If viewed on a broader, more universal scale, natural disasters could destroy planets and cause stars to explode. Natural disasters could give birth to black holes, which were at the apex of destructive power. So to kill all the abominations here, he wanted to give rise to the necessary circumstances for a natural disaster to occur. Due to his natural affinity for volcanoes, Lex naturally considered that first. But as his spirit sense reached deep into the ground, to the very limits of his spirit sense, he could find no lava. Despite the massive weight and pressure that the deep underground of this place must experience, it was not able to turn into lava due to the deep infiltration of energy. In fact, the deeper he went, the colder it seemed. It was tragic, but it was not the end. He could use the abundance of the energy in this place to give birth to a new kind of natural disaster. Although, by definition, instigating the disaster himself made it an artificial disaster, the point of the matter was to use the abundant resources available here to power the disaster instead of doing it himself. Since yang energy could nourish yin, then under the right circumstances, the reverse could also be true. He just had to set the stage for that to happen naturally and organically himself. After gaining a deep and thorough understanding of the patterns of the graveyard, it was pretty easy. It was like setting off a forest fire. If the weather was dry, and there was enough kindling, and the wind was blowing just right, a single, half-extinguished match could be the start of catastrophic devastation. Heavy winds began to blast through the graveyard as Lex's body started to rise, and suddenly the aura of danger his body gave off increased drastically. In fact, it wasn't just the abominations who felt it, the contestants did too. There was a single glyph painted over his pupil, and comparatively speaking, it was a fairly simple one. It was one of dragonfire. The array around him hummed as it suddenly reached completion, and energy from the universe around it surged in to fill the array, like air rushing in to fill an exposed vacuum. The array suddenly vanished, and turned into a gold aura that surrounded Lex. He immediately extinguished the dragonfire around him, briefly exposing himself to the tide of abominations. Then a beam of red fire shot out of his eye, coated perfectly by the gold aura. The abominations threw themselves at the flames, ready to douse it as they had done with the others. But as their bodies touched the gold aura, they paused. When they finally touched the flames, instead of extinguishing it like a rainstorm putting out a puny bonfire, they fed it, as if someone had thrown fuel into an open flame. In a fraction of a second, too quick for even Lex to follow, the flame spread across every abomination in the sphere around him. Lex suddenly activated his Heaven's Furnace technique, shutting himself in. The timing was opportune, for the sphere suddenly exploded with such awesome might that it completely transcended Lex's own realm of power. Where previously Lex had struggled to barely crack space, now cracks spread for hundreds of miles around him. Where previously a black curtain of abomination covered the entire region, now a curtain of dragonfire, coated in an aura of golden, burned above the graveyard. Each and every contestant cursed together, and all of them started to retreat and run away, but where could they run? A rain of liquid golden dragonfire burst from the clouds in the sky, turning the graveyard into the largest crematorium to have ever existed. All hope was lost. The contestants could not escape. Just as the first of the dragonfire was about to fall onto the first of them, it suddenly changed direction and fell beside them. From a massive hole in space, leading to the void, where the original sphere surrounding had been, Lex emerged, not so much as an extra wrinkle or crease on his clothes. He kept his right eye active, consciously keeping all the contestants safe. From his left eye he observed the newborn disaster that was quickly spreading across the entire graveyard. In case it ran into any unexpected problems, he would need to act. But there was nothing that could prevent this spreading fire. It was almost funny. When Lex came here, his first impression of the graveyard had been of hell, so he lit the whole place on fire and turned it into purgatory. Did that make him the devil? Chapter 1197 keeps changing. The other contestants were stunned. Those two figures secretly watching over the graveyard were stunned. The viewers who were streaming the contest were stunned, though admittedly by the time they watched the show everything was already over. Everyone was stunned. Yet Lex quietly stood there, mid-air, and watched the fire rain down with a neutral expression. The graveyard was truly massive, to the point where he could not see its end. That was why the expected clearing time was months and months, yet now it might be cleared before the day even ended. The sky was on fire, raining down liquid fire, causing the corpses on the ground to burn as well, finally finding some kind of release from all the abominations. Giselle, who was standing alone in the fire, unprotected by Lex since even he had not spotted her, looked up at him with a hint of annoyance. She had things she had planned to do here. It was hard to come across a place with such purine energy, which was the perfect place to nurture a few specific profane treasures. Yet now that was impossible. She sighed, and sat down, rethinking all her future plans. It was very likely that Lex's interference would be strong in all of them, so if she wanted to accomplish all the goals she had set out, she would need to put in extra effort. Everyone, all the other contestants who had entered the preliminary tournament feeling an abundance of confidence, looked up at Lex with a hint of fear, and wondered what was going through his head. What they didn't know was Lex was evaluating his escape plan that he had used to avoid the majority of the impact from the blast. Just because an explosion was strong did not mean it could rip a hole through space, otherwise all supernovae would do just that, not to mention all the attacks from stronger Earth immortals and above. Instead, only attacks specifically targeting space itself would cause any damage at all. By trapping himself in the heaven's furnace and coating himself in a layer of space, he made it so that the might of the explosion literally ripped the chunk of space surrounding him away, causing the hole. By being thrown into the void, he avoided the brunt of the explosive force. The heaven's furnace then protected him from the pressure of the void until he came back. Although for now it was just something he used to avoid too much pressure on his seals, it was a nice escape plan for the future if he ever needed it. I just got news, Marlowe said as cracked his knuckles and activated his nanotalismans. A single contestant in the nascent realm finished an entire trial by himself in less than a day. Impossible, Raphael scoffed. Yet they both knew it was not impossible. It was a fact. The guy who did it is an old student of mine, Marlowe said, as a powerful aura began to envelop him. I can't let my students overtake me. Before Raphael could say something, Marlowe leaped forward, crash-landing directly in the middle of the stone monsters. Dragon's Bane. Raphael murmured and wondered why the timeline was changing once more. What was the point of seeing the future if the future kept changing? Not that he understood his ability all that much. He had figured out that he would randomly see his whole life play out and remember it clearly. When he'd wake up from the vision, the future would play out mostly as he had seen. But each time, something extremely critical seemed to change. Even now, changes were already happening before the tourney even began, and he couldn't afford that. They had to become as strong as possible if they were to survive what was to come. That's why he had a hint dropped for how his father could progress his cultivation. The path of the primes, it was too difficult, but it was also their only hope. Raphael sighed, and then jumped down as well. Chapter 1197 keeps changing. The other contestants were stunned. Those two figures secretly watching over the graveyard were stunned. The viewers who were streaming the contest were stunned, though admittedly by the time they watched the show everything was already over. Everyone was stunned. Yet Lex quietly stood there, mid-air, and watched the fire rain down with a neutral expression. The graveyard was truly massive, to the point where he could not see its end. That was why the expected clearing time was months and months, yet now it might be cleared before the day even ended. The sky was on fire, raining down liquid fire, causing the corpses on the ground to burn as well, finally finding some kind of release from all the abominations. Giselle, who was standing alone in the fire, unprotected by Lex since even he had not spotted her, looked up at him with a hint of annoyance. She had things she had planned to do here. It was hard to come across a place with such purine energy, which was the perfect place to nurture a few specific profane treasures. Yet now that was impossible. She sighed, and sat down, rethinking all her future plans. It was very likely that Lex's interference would be strong in all of them, so if she wanted to accomplish all the goals she had set out, she would need to put in extra effort. Everyone, all the other contestants who had entered the preliminary tournament feeling an abundance of confidence, looked up at Lex with a hint of fear, and wondered what was going through his head. What they didn't know was Lex was evaluating his escape plan that he had used to avoid the majority of the impact from the blast. Just because an explosion was strong did not mean it could rip a hole through space, otherwise all supernovae would do just that, not to mention all the attacks from stronger Earth immortals and above. Instead, only attacks specifically targeting space itself would cause any damage at all. By trapping himself in the heaven's furnace and coating himself in a layer of space, he made it so that the might of the explosion literally ripped the chunk of space surrounding him away, causing the hole. By being thrown into the void, he avoided the brunt of the explosive force. The heaven's furnace then protected him from the pressure of the void until he came back. Although for now it was just something he used to avoid too much pressure on his seals, it was a nice escape plan for the future if he ever needed it. "I just got news," Marlowe said as cracked his knuckles and activated his nanotalismans. A single contestant in the nascent realm finished an entire trial by himself in less than a day. "Impossible," Raphael scoffed. Yet they both knew it was not impossible. It was a fact. "The guy who did it is an old student of mine," Marlowe said, as a powerful aura began to envelop him. "I can't let my students overtake me." Before Raphael could say something, Marlowe leaped forward, crash-landing directly in the middle of the stone monsters. "Dragon's Bane." Raphael murmured and wondered why the timeline was changing once more. What was the point of seeing the future if the future kept changing? Not that he understood his ability all that much. He had figured out that he would randomly see his whole life play out and remember it clearly. When he'd wake up from the vision, the future would play out mostly as he had seen. But each time, something extremely critical seemed to change. Even now, changes were already happening before the tourney even began, and he couldn't afford that. They had to become as strong as possible if they were to survive what was to come. That's why he had a hint dropped for how his father could progress his cultivation. The path of the primes, it was too difficult, but it was also their only hope. Raphael sighed, and then jumped down as well. Chapter 1198. A little tough. Is he usually like that? Is he really so strong? Moon asked as she looked up at the screen and ate a burrito. Much like the two had watched Lex in Lover's Island, they were watching him partake in the tournament, although Moon had to admit that the impression he gave off was vastly different this time around. The way he stood there, high up in the air, looking down upon a burning world like a sovereign, Lex was almost completely unrecognizable. She could hardly believe this was the same Lex she knew. After all, during their childhood, Lex was not much of a fighter. "Don't let him fool you," Z said with a knowing tone that only an employee could have towards their boss. "He's actually probably much stronger. He just likes to look cool while he does anything. One moment you'll think he'll be at the end of his rope, fighting to barely hold on, yet if a stronger enemy would show up he would still defeat them, and somehow make it look just as difficult, as if he was truly at the end of his rope this time. I've never actually seen him lose a fight. I'm completely convinced that he's secretly a much higher cultivation realm and just pretending to be weak." Moon marveled as she looked up at her brother, and her understanding of him changed once more. "You do not need to worry at all," Lex said very calmly to the figure sitting in front of him. "The very reason we had this meeting inside the inn was because of the security and protection it affords. Nobody can divine our meeting. Nobody will know of our agreement until it is too late." "Very well. That is reassuring to hear. Just so that I know, at the critical time, will the innkeeper be making a move as well?" Lex's expression did not change, nor did he suffer any fluctuations when asked this question. It was one he had answered many times already by now. He himself had only visited it once, but the benefits it offered were genuine. More importantly, apparently Emperor Jotun himself had once gained a great harvest from such a tower. There was too much of a theme going on for it to be a coincidence, yet Lex had no idea what the truth behind this could be. It might really just end up being a genuine coincidence, considering a tower was not exactly an abstract shape, and perfectly fit the requisite of having many levels. He didn't say anything, and just walked through the door that brought him to a jungle. He looked around and found nothing similar to a maze, so he momentarily considered that this might be a different kind of maze using some kind of esoteric laws or techniques. But almost immediately he noticed the anomaly. He rose up into the sky and saw, many thousands of miles away on two of his sides, walls that seemed to rise beyond his ability to see or comprehend. Moreover, there was no space up above him. The sky seemed to extend for eternity, alongside the walls. Lex spread his spirit sense apart to its absolute limit, but was not even able to touch the walls. Moreover, when he looked down the corridor on both sides, he could not see where they led. The size of this maze was. Lex tried not to think about it. He tried using his spatial laws, and was relieved to discover that they worked. At least he'd be able to traverse large distances easily. The only problem was that the space here felt oddly different, as if he was no longer inside the origin realm. Moreover, there were clearly defined borders to what he could sense. He began teleporting towards the wall, which wasn't too hard. The problem arose when he came close to the wall. Not only could he not teleport beyond the wall, as it blocked his ability to sense or control space, he almost couldn't use his powers near it at all. The closer he came to the wall, the more he was deprived of energy until all that was left was the physical power in his body. Lex sighed. It was going to be a little tough to speed through this one. Chapter 1199 Not Going to Work. Lex knocked on the light brown walls that rose to eternity, and they were pretty solid, as expected. When he tried to look at the laws associated with it, all he saw was an endless abyss, and felt an incredible strain on his eye, causing him to close it. This place was obviously far from normal, but then again, it would have never been a part of the tournament if it were ordinary. In fact, considering how unique this place was, Lex could not even imagine what had been left in store for the main tourney. Of course he had learned some details, but that did not mean he knew everything. Lex looked in both open directions, trying to determine which way he should go. His instincts weren't guiding him specifically anywhere, which meant that there was no underlying threat or danger to him in the area. But he didn't need there to be such a thing for his instinct to act. He focused on the thought of a tower in the middle, and tried to get his instincts to focus on that. Yet, unexpectedly, it failed. Unsure if the walls were interfering with his instincts, he put some distance between himself and the wall, yet it still did not react in any way. But when he tried focusing his instincts towards something else, for example food, it worked just fine. With literally no hint towards how to solve the maze, Lex cautiously started to teleport in one direction. He kept his spirit sense spread, searching for other contestants or any sentient native beings. But all he found were numerous beasts and wildlife, none of them even remotely threatening. The strongest of them was in the Golden Core realm. But that did not mean he thought for even a moment that this place was safe. If it were, it wouldn't have been saved for the tournament that included the Origin Realm's best. Not only did Lex not find that odd, he was reassured by it. Clearly Giselle was not simple, and the fact that she could nearly block his instincts from acting only supported that premise. With a clear direction to head towards, Lex stopped holding back and increased the distance he would teleport to. The odd influence of the walls which sucked away all abilities actually greatly diminished Lex's teleportation range at every intersection, but other than that he could move around freely. As Lex watched the various landscapes underneath him change, he thought it was a bit of a waste. He would have loved to explore this maze properly, but he had no time. He swore to himself that once he was strong enough not to worry about things, he would take his time and explore everything that the universe had to offer. After all, the whole point of being strong was so that he could do the things he wanted. If he didn't have a whole list of things he was being prevented from doing because he was too weak, what would be the point in getting stronger? Surprisingly enough, even with Lex teleporting with the greatest distances that he could manage, it still took him hours before he approached Giselle, which only spoke about the vast range that this place offered. Yet once he arrived at the location his instincts were guiding him towards, they stopped working. It was as if she was in the vicinity, but his instincts couldn't find her. Beneath him was a vast, green plain covered in tall grass, shrubbery, and a few clusters of trees here and there. There was nothing specifically interesting about this place where he could start looking, so he began sweeping the general area with his spirit sense. He even stayed floating up in the air so that he was visible from afar, so that Giselle could spot him. Yet his strategy was bound to fail, since Giselle was not in the plains, but in a ruins hidden underneath them. Chapter 1200 Treasure Hunt. Lex sat atop a tree stump as he looked out at the plains in front of him. He had searched for Giselle for 20 minutes, but hadn't been able to find her. Considering his searching speed, 20 minutes was a large amount of time, yet it yielded nothing. But his instincts seemed to insist that Giselle was in this general area. He rubbed his chin as he thought of multiple ideas of how to proceed. Since he couldn't find her, and she hadn't contacted him, that meant that either she hadn't seen him or was avoiding him. Considering their prior fruitful partnership, he didn't see why she might be avoiding him, so the chances of her being unable to spot him were highest. Lex considered any number of possibilities, from sealed domains to trapping formations and many more. All of that basically only meant one thing, that he had to search even more thoroughly. Lex closed his eyes and used one of the cloning techniques he had mastered. The reason why he didn't use it more often was because it was highly limited. The fighting strength of each clone was basically non-existent, though they could use his techniques and abilities. They also could not be too far from him, which limited their effectiveness range. But they also had their uses. For example, while he sat on the stump, 50 other Lex spread out and began searching. More than 10 of them entered the soul state and went underground while the others spread out, searching for hidden areas. With the power of 50 Lexes, nothing could be hidden. Immediately 50 different streams of information began flowing into his mind, and he paid equal attention to all of them. He began to understand the fauna and flora of this plane, and gained an in-depth comprehension of this ecosystem. He learned about the weather, and strange wind patterns caused by the presence of the walls. He learned how the landscape's experience changed over the years. His clones deep underground studied the soil structures, and noticed the various layers. He could guess how old each layer was. He could. "Let's imagine you are," she said slowly. "What then?" "I would like your aid in reaching the middle as fast as possible. In exchange, I can pay you, or help you out with something you need." Giselle studied Lex for a moment, considering his proposal, before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, I can't be of help to you. If I were heading towards the middle, I would take you, but I have a number of goals I need to accomplish along the way." Lex was not disappointed, for he had not expected Giselle to comply so easily either. "If you don't mind me asking, do your goals involve a bit of treasure hunting?" he asked. "Because if it is, I think we can come to an arrangement. I think you will find that there is no better partner when it comes to treasure hunting than I. Not only can I help you teleport long distances towards your next goal, but I can also help you find the treasures much quicker. If I help you speed up your treasure hunts until they're done, then can you lead me to the center?" Giselle's gaze on Lex became more intense, yet Lex wasn't bothered. Based on what happened at the temple, he could guess that she was a treasure hunter of sorts, with inside knowledge. He supposed it made sense, for when looking for treasures, one needed to be armed with the most detailed knowledge. If he could help her fulfill her goals, she could then help him get through the maze. It would still end up being quicker than trying to resolve the maze himself. Of course, in case she said no, or was unable to help, Lex had one last thing he could try, which was prophecy. But his own ability to look into the future was not the best, or more specifically, the most detail-oriented. He was not sure if he could use it to find his way. Even if that were my intention, which I'm not saying it is, why would I bring you? Don't take this the wrong way, but bringing people along on a treasure hunt is usually the best way to get stabbed in the back. Lex smiled. The fact that she hadn't said no directly meant that there was a chance this could work. Chapter 12:01 No monologue for today. I think I've already proven that I'm not interested in treasures, Lex said. Otherwise I would have followed you back in the temple. By now, you've had more than enough time to sell, use, or dispose of the treasure if you managed to find it in time. That was a time bubble, which contained the most valuable treasures in the whole universe. If they did not attract me, why would anything else? But, if it makes you feel any better, I can swear an oath. All latest novels at novelhall.com. You make a good point about the temple. I'll tell you what. We'll make an agreement. If you can truly help me fulfill my objective, and be forewarned they are not without danger, then I'll help you get to the middle as quickly as I can. Giselle was slightly suspicious. The oath she had Lex take last time was a very strong one, and he should have felt the binds of it within his soul. That was not the kind of thing anyone would mess with, yet here he was, ready to take another oath to speed things along. Yet how could she have known that her little oath was no burden to him at all, and that he could unravel it when he wished? After all, most people don't have the courage to mess with their souls. So she gave in to the idea. After all, Lex had proved himself competent. She was not opposed to speeding up her journey via teleportation. She handed Lex the same stone as last time, and he did not hesitate from swearing an oath. With a smile, he handed the stone back to her and said, "Great, so let's get started. Where to? Or, in case you don't know the exact location of what you're looking for, you can tell me what it is and I can help you find it." Giselle held up her watch and did something with it. Whatever she was doing was a mystery to Lex, for he could not see any display on the watch. "Before we begin, do you know what this place is?" she asked. "Are you insinuating that this is not just a massive, mysterious maze with walls that disable all powers?" "No, it's not," she said. "The reason that this place is so massive is because this is an entirely separate realm. To be specific, this is a realm that was destroyed during the Realm War. For whatever reason, the remnants of this realm were absorbed by the Origin Realm. It is currently in the process of being digested by the Origin Realm, which means that its laws are being absorbed by the Origin Realm. The reason why your powers don't work close to the walls is because the walls are constantly absorbing the powers of this place." Lex's casual attitude subsided. The Realm Wars was one of the things he was most concerned about, since it was in his best interest to keep the Midnight Realm hidden, something he literally could not do while using it as an inn. But Giselle did not seem to notice the change since she was focused on her watch. As you can probably guess, since this is an entire realm, then it contains countless valuable treasures, some naturally occurring, some remnants of treasures and items from when this realm was whole. I, obviously, am not after every single treasure from that realm. But the number of things I am after are not few, so you should prepare yourself. For a moment she was startled, but when she noticed that the winds were unable to break through whatever technique he had employed, she calmed down, and then looked at Lex warily. "I know you're in a rush, but there's no need to take drastic measures. Those winds contain countless laws. They could easily rip an Earth immortal to shreds." "Yes, I know," Lex said nonchalantly. "That's why I put you in here. Don't worry, I won't let you come to harm." Completely oblivious to the fact that Giselle was not concerned about her well-being, but rather his, Lex took a look at the castle. It had suffered tremendously, though whether it was the winds that destroyed the once grand castle or something else could not be determined. "Follow me," Lex said as he flew through a massive hole in the wall, and navigated through the darkness into the lower levels. Lex did not expect the castle to have so many lower levels, but it kept on going, right up until they ended up entering an enormous underground cavern within which an entire city was built. The castle protects the entrance to the city? That's pretty cool, Lex said, as he zoomed directly to where he felt the aura. They ended up in a highly decorated building, yet just as they entered Lex stopped moving. In front of them, 3 figures stepped out of the shadows, each of them radiating an aura of an immortal. Well, what do we have here? The man with completely black eyes and deathly pale skin said. I guess I was wrong. Turns out you can work with someone. Giselle grimaced and pulled out her sword. She was not expecting to face 3 prophanites. More importantly, it seemed like all of these prophanites were directly being controlled by a defiler. They all looked towards Lex, who had an unreadable expression, and asked, "Do you know who you're working with? Do you know she's going to get you killed? Get everyone you know killed? Get everything you love destroyed?" They grinned at him menacingly as they began to weigh Lex down with their aura. But he didn't react the way they expected. Instead of being intimidated, he just sighed with disappointment. "Still not worthy of my sword," he muttered, then attacked. He didn't even bother unsealing his second seal as he full body slammed the first prophanite, launching his body across the hall. "I'm in a rush, so please skip all the monologuing for today," Lex said, before punching the second prophanite. A fight immediately broke out. Chapter 1202 Fishing. The prophanites knew to expect a tough fight from Giselle. That was exactly why 3 of them had grouped up to face her this time. Even then, it was just 3 of them in this particular place. Who knew how many of them there were across the entire maze? Giselle herself had no idea how they were following her or why they knew what she was looking for. After all, technically speaking, places like the temple and the maze were blocked off, and to gain admittance one would need to come through the tournament. But she was certain there were no prophanites participating in the tournament. She had even checked. Most up-to-date novels are published on n0velg.co/m. Yet they appeared in her way nonetheless, ready and able to stop her. They had even prepared with greater numbers to pressure her, and just enough strength to defeat her without attracting attention. What they were not prepared for, however, was the absurdity that was Lex. He did not care that they were immortals and he was not. He did not care that their every whim could bend the laws of the world, and that he would be at their mercy. He did not care that as a mere nascent realm cultivator, he was not supposed to be able to control laws. Lex simply unleashed his inhuman physical strength, smashing the immortal body of the prophanite he attacked into a meat patty. Such a feat was supposed to be impossible. One of the reasons immortals were so superior to mortals was not only because their new cultivation level granted them the biggest boost yet, but also because they were increasingly beings of law. That meant without the influence of laws, it was nigh impossible to hurt them. If Lex had at least coated the surface of his body in some kind of law, even one as simple as the law of physical strength, then at least the prophanites would have had some warning. But Lex didn't, so they were caught unprepared. After all, when Lex's very own spiritual energy contained an affinity for laws, then he could just use the very laws that made up the prophanites' bodies to hurt them. Of course, no one save Lex understood this, which is why even as they got ready to fight him back, they could not identify why exactly his punches hurt so much. "Junior, you dare," the third prophanite yelled, unleashing a dark and menacing wave of energy that did absolutely nothing to stop Lex's fist from breaking his nose. "What the hell are you?" the first prophanite screamed as his body recovered from Lex's body slam. Profane energy should have eaten right through his flesh, devouring him whole. Yet it was not even giving him a rash. "I miss the time where smashing your enemies would just kill them," Lex said as he looked at the stunned Giselle, waking her from her shock. "Now, instead, I have to actually work for it." The 3 prophanites attacked Lex together, completely forgetting about Giselle, yet they made no progress. They were completely unable to hit Lex, for he could dodge all of their attacks easily, and when he did decide to tank the attacks they caused not even a wrinkle on his clothes. Giselle, who was right behind Lex, did not waste the opportunity as her silver sword cut the 2 immortals down, killing them. She had also killed the first immortal, who had only been severely damaged earlier. See, that wasn't so bad, Lex said as he continued deeper into the building, ignoring the attempted murder as well as the things that the prophanites said. It was never a good idea to listen too much to one's enemies instead of their allies. No, that was definitely pretty bad, Giselle said as she sheathed her sword. You're just really strong. I can't believe you're not an immortal yet. Lex smiled. Although he was not one to succumb to flattery, it also felt good to receive praise once in a while. Not like Z, who was always suspicious that Lex was holding back to begin with. You're not so bad yourself, Lex said. The profane energy these guys use is pretty nasty, but when you use it, it feels completely different. Giselle stumbled, and then looked back at Lex, but he did not seem to have any accusation in his eyes. He genuinely did not seem to care that she was using the same revolting energy as them. From his point of view, instead of being appalled, he was intrigued. Everything about Giselle seemed to signify elegance and purity. He still recalled that ballet that he saw her perform so many years ago. It was mesmerizing, and as the years passed that same grace showed in all of her actions. The way she used her sword, the way she dodged, the way she struck, all of them carried a certain, unexplainable charm. How could she achieve that when he was using an energy which, otherwise, seemed to be associated with everything revolting? You're not wary? She asked, and for good reason. Profane energy naturally elicited a strong repulsive reaction in most people. Lex didn't seem to mind though. I saw a few other things beside profane energy as well, Lex said, pointing towards his eyes. The way you use energies is very interesting. I've never seen anyone else use so many different energies before. The way you flow from one energy to the next is remarkable. In comparison, the way I use them is very rigid and systematic, although that has never failed me either. To demonstrate what he was saying, he began using his various affinities, using one in each of his fingers of both of his hands. It was quite a sight to see space, fire, divine, restorative, soul, spiritual, draconic, defensive energies in each of his fingers, with the ninth displaying sword intent and the 10th showing something she did not quite understand. For a moment she was stunned, then she snorted and looked away. Fishing for a compliment, she said under her breath, though they both knew it was loud enough for Lex to hear. With a chuckle Lex led the way, until finally they got their hands on the divine artifacts. Then they teleported away. Chapter 1203 Control. By the time Lex and Giselle got their hands on the 9th artifact from the Selpak Empire, only a few hours had passed. With a clear destination that he could sense, distance was of no consequence to Lex at all. They only faced one more ambush, and this time the prophanites genuinely ambushed them instead of walking up brazenly to them despite their greater numbers. It was during that ambush that Lex noticed that all the prophanites, despite the different bodies, were essentially clones, or rather puppets of whoever was supplying them with power. They knew everything that the previous prophanites experienced and so planned for it. Giselle had also let him know what to expect when facing them. Basically, profane energy was the source of all their power, and traditionally gave them an immense advantage over everyone they faced, including immortals. Profane energy was a higher quality, higher-leveled energy that surpassed general spirit energy, which is why normal immortals' attacks, defense, and even their bodies were weak to them. Only using laws would allow others to combat them, but usually even that was not enough, for even using laws required the immortal to at least use some of the spirit energy. But, for reasons she could just not imagine, not only did profane energy not harm him at all, even when they were ambushed and the prophanites tried to curse him using the immense powers of profane energy, it hardly seemed to work. Read latest chapters at novelhall.com. It's quite simple actually, said Lex as they teleported away from another collapsing ruin. He had to say, the Selpak people really did have good quality architecture for their buildings to still be surviving, even if only barely. She gave him a contemplative look, and then eventually sighed. It's simple really, she said, paraphrasing exactly how he began. When it comes to the Tao, there is no such thing as good or evil. Even things that are perceived as the worst side of existence such as pain, death, rot, decay, they are a part of a natural order that keeps the balance. Good and evil are just constructs of the living. Which means that even in the most vile of existences, such as that of profane energy, which is revulsed by entire galaxies and realms, there is an element of elegance and grace. Not that I'm defending those that spread death and destruction, no. I'm just saying that once it enters my hand, once anything enters my hand, it becomes a force for the purpose I deign, and nothing else. She held up her sleek, silver sword, looking at it with deep eyes as she continued. After all, there are so many things that are considered evil by some and good by others. Swords have ruined just as many lives as they have saved, yet they are considered the weapons of the righteous by most factions. Lex did not comment, for she was clearly distracted by certain memories, but he understood the essence of what she was saying. Basically, like Lex specifically focused on defense, she specifically focused on control. She gained a perfect mastery over whatever she used, so that it adopted the traits she desired from it, and not the ones it usually exhibited. It was impressive, and not easy at all. Although technically speaking, Lex also had excellent control of all his energies, his naturally increased comprehension played a significant role in that. Even then, he could not so easily manipulate what traits his energies showed. It had never been his purpose to begin with. After a few more hours, they finished collecting all the cell-pack chores, at which point Giselle mentioned her next objective. One by one, Lex helped her go through all of them, proving his worth when it came to finding even the most hidden of items. Even then, it took an entire week for them to complete all of Giselle's objectives, and begin making their way towards the center. That's when Giselle finally revealed why the center seemed hidden. Chapter 1204 Disasters. This realm is being absorbed by the origin realm, I've told you that much. But the source of this realm seems to have manifested in the form of that tower. Basically, that is where the laws of that realm are the strongest, almost making it like an entire realm altogether. For you to find it using your senses would require you to have senses that could transcend the boundaries between realms. Even for you, that would be a bit much. That is also one of the reasons why the purpose of this final trial is to clear a floor in the tower. For every floor you clear, a bit of its power gets used up, and it becomes easier for the origin realm to absorb this realm. If you somehow manage to clear the whole tower, then not only will you gain a tremendous reward, but a massive amount of energy will be used up. Let me guess, your goal is that final treasure on the last floor? Lex said casually. He had no doubt whatever the final reward was, it would be great. Yet he had access to the Tower of Providence and another unnamed tower back in the Midnight Realm. If he ever felt greedy for treasures, he would just go there. Not to mention the fishing well, which could randomly pull out amazing objects. Of course it is, she said as a matter of fact. Just like you have your goals at the moment, so do I, and I need every single advantage I can get to help me along the way. She paused for a moment and looked at Lex with a challenge in her eyes. But since my next target is the tower anyway, I won't ask for your help in getting through the tower or getting the final reward. Whoever earns the reward should keep it. Lex raised an eyebrow. Was she challenging him? Then came spacequakes. Lex was fairly confident in his ability to manipulate space, so he felt like this would be a walk in the park. But just as he was about to use his ability to protect himself, his instincts warned him not to. Listening to his instincts, Lex allowed the spacequake to hit him directly, which felt like a truck had smashed directly inside his body while bypassing his skin entirely. Heck, Lex was certain that if anyone else would have been in his place, their golden core would have popped just from that crash. But it also allowed him to understand why trying to use any spatial abilities would be a bad idea. Whenever he controlled any amount of space at all, for any purpose, he experienced the equivalent amount of pressure. An easy comparison was using a weapon. Before he could use it, he had to bear the weight of the weapon. But most of the time that weight was not enough to cause any problems. Yet if he tried to manipulate space during a spacequake, then he would have to tolerate the pressure of the entire region that was experiencing that quake. Even if he aspired to be tough enough to tolerate an attack from a heavenly immortal, he was instantly reminded that in the face of nature he was nothing. He did not doubt that his entire body would turn to mush if he had tried to fight against the spacequake. Even if he managed to survive that somehow, he didn't want to go through adolescence again. In comparison, Giselle was having a much easier time. It couldn't be helped. Even if Lex had a tough body, it was still that of a mortal, while Giselle's had experienced the tempering of tribulations, and was fundamentally different. Not that Lex let her know he was struggling for even a second. After the spacequake they experienced a spirit storm. That was not a storm of spiritual energy which was used for cultivation, but rather a storm made up of the part of a living being which determined consciousness. It was a storm of thoughts, and while Lex's body was completely unharmed, his mind was battered by the final wails of the countless living beings right before their realm died. Even someone as tough as Lex could not be immune to the anguish of an entire realm. Chapter 1205 History of Man. He experienced no physical change, but for a half a second, Lex blacked out. His mind shut down from the sheer extent of the despair he was forced to experience as a self-defense mechanism. It worked, and he was saved. But the problem was that he was in the middle of a storm, and so the moment he woke up from his blackout, he was hit by another whale, causing him to fall into another blackout. Read latest chapters at novelhall.com. Giselle noticed that something was wrong with Lex, and moved to surround him with a protective bubble. Yet before she could do anything, Lex woke up again, and immediately activated Mind Meld. This was an ability he gained which allowed him to turn into thought itself. Or another way of putting it was that he gave up his physical form to whatever extent he wanted and turned it into the same spiritual energy which made up this storm. This storm allowed him to realize that his passive defense against spiritual attacks might not be the best, so he needed to work on that. But that did not mean his active defense was weak. His spiritual energy pushed against that of the storm, and he kept it from attacking his mind. After giving Giselle a reassuring nod, he pushed through till they passed the storm. Afterwards they encountered various other obstacles, each of which was challenging in its own way. Realistically speaking, let alone passing through the tower, just reaching it would disqualify most participants if they weren't in the immortal realm. Yet that was not an obstacle for Lex, and after endless struggle they finally made it to the tower in the middle of the maze. Truthfully, it was far from what Lex was expecting. He thought he would be welcomed by a magnificent piece of architecture, radiating an ancient and deep power, or at least something along those lines. Instead, the tower seemed like a mix of all the topographies he had seen in the maze, forcefully pulled up from the ground and joined together in a haphazard way to form a tower. At first there was only chaos and fire, so that he could not understand what he was seeing. Then the vision began to change, and through the fire he saw a few odd shapes through the fire, moving quickly. Abruptly it changed, and Lex realized what he was seeing. From broken into pieces, the space that constituted the realm returned to a fractured state, and time played backwards in front of his eyes. In a matter of seconds the realm, which reminded him of the crystal realm in the sense that it was one continuous territory from border to border, appeared. It was a perfect circle, and the distribution of all territories in it seemed to follow a certain flow. As time sped backwards in front of his eyes, he could see the land shift and ripple as if it were liquid, changing over the course of millions of years, acting out in perfect synchronization with the countless energies that existed around the lands. Compared to every other realm he had ever seen, this one was in perfect balance, to the extent that it seemed strange to him. Not only were the changes in the lands moving in one particular flow, but so was the movement, progress, and decline of the countless races that inhabited those lands. Then the image zoomed in, and instead of the realm, what he saw was the development of human civilization play out, just in reverse. In a matter of a few seconds, from the peak of a technologically advanced race, mankind was brought back to the Stone Age. In front of Lex was a small boy, walking awkwardly through a small forest, looking for something. A twig snapped, and when the boy looked over he saw a dog, skinny and mangy, but much more deadly than an unarmed little boy. It growled, and then pounced. The boy jumped to the side, but he was too slow, and the dog bit into his leg. Startled, afraid, and in pain, the little boy went manic, blindly hitting the dog with everything he had in an attempt to save himself. At some point, without realizing, he picked up a small rock and smashed it on the dog's head, causing it to fall limp. At that moment, the scene froze, and then dissolved. Lex found himself standing inside a forest, and a twig snapped behind him. Chapter 1206 I'll take care of it. Lex turned around and saw a dog. It was nowhere near as skinny and mangy as the one he saw in the vision, but as an ordinary golden core beast, in front of him it might as well be. The dog lunged at him, and broke its teeth trying to bite him. Feeling a mix of shock, fear and anger, the dog retreated and tried to claw at him, but it broke its nails instead. Lex sighed, and feeling a hint of mercy, he put the miserable dog out of its misery before it could harm itself some more. The vision returned, and Lex saw another scene. He wondered if that counted as him passing through the first level. Wasn't that way too easy? Then again, reaching the tower had been hard to begin with. Maybe reaching the tower already ensured that they had passed the level, but needed to motivate contestants to go through levels, so they added the condition of passing through at least one floor or level. Your favorite stories at novelhall.com. This time, in the vision, he saw an older human, though he was at most a teenager. He was leaping from branch to branch, treating the trees in the forest like his home. Yet this was not some casual commute. It was in the middle of a fight with a ferocious ape, who was also swinging through the trees, pursuing him. The two figures clashed time and time again, but in one particular clash, the human faltered. He was thrown back, and though he tried to latch onto a nearby branch, it broke. The human fell to the floor with a pointed branch in his hand. He barely had a moment to orient himself before the ape attacked again, and in what was the first spear jab of the entire realm, the human stuck the pointed end of the branch through the ape. The scene ended, and Lex found himself standing on a tree branch. His instincts warned him of something coming at him quickly, but Lex still didn't bother moving. This time, the beast that he faced was at the peak of the Golden Core realm, but it was not enough to harm him, and he quickly ended the fight. The vision continued, and the scene in front of him was very different. There was a caveman and a woman, wrapped in animal skins during the winter chill. It had not snowed yet, but the low temperatures were too much for mundane humans to bear, and one of them fell to the ground. The other tried to get her to stand, but she was unable, and soon the chill set in. She was dying, yet the man didn't know what to do. Her eyes closed, and the man lost his mind. He cried out against the heavens, and beat the ground in frustration, again, and again, and again, until his hands were bloody, but he could not feel pain. Yet just as Lex defeated his foe, and he was about to witness the next great achievement, Mary showed up on his shoulder, and her expression was far from her usual chirpy stuff. "I have some bad news," she said solemnly. Someone discovered Moon. Someone kept the World Eater busy while there was an assassination attempt. Luckily, Z was there, so she survived unharmed. Since then, the World Eater has changed locations again. But if they can find her once... Lex's expression became grim and his mind started working, ignoring everything around him as he thought of solutions. Did Gerard and Luther get back with something yet? Not yet. Well, send them word. Let them use more drastic measures if need be. We're bringing the deadline closer. Have Velma coordinate everything. Have all forces on standby and ready to take action at a moment's notice. Got it. How's Moon doing? What's her progress with her connection to the planet? She's fine for now, but as a result of the assassination attempt, her planet took quite a beating. That has slowed down her progress. Lex frowned, and turned to look back at the image unfolding in front of him. The humans were finally ready to declare their first king. I'll take care of it. Make sure the World Eater keeps moving her planet. Don't settle in any one place. Lex opened the buttons of his shirt one by one, and then undid his second seal on his chest, leaving only the final one remaining. Chapter 1207 An Old Enemy. Lex was more than ready to punch something hard in the face when the next challenge began. But instead of a monster or foe, he faced the weight of responsibility. Since the challenge had occurred as a result of a humankind being crowned, the foe Lex faced was the abstract challenge faced by the first ever human king in the face of an uncertain world, and uncertain future. Oddly enough, Lex found the sensation he faced to be a familiar feeling instead of a formidable foe. It was the feeling of having the weight of countless lives in the palm of his hand. It was the weight of knowing that every word he said could ruin the future of countless lives if it was the wrong one. The feeling was one of measuring someone, and finding them guilty of death, of making that judgment over another life and then carrying it out as well. The weight of that feeling was not solid or quantifiable, yet it was enough to shatter worlds. It could break backs and bend knees, it ground grindstone to dust and empires to dirt. It was an abstract weight that could cripple even the most capable of minds. But Lex was already used to carrying it. Without any extra effort at all, Lex passed the level and continued on to the next, yet once more the foe he faced was not one he could punch. Rather, he faced the obstacle of famine. Then came crime, greed, and then poverty. He faced every literal and metaphorical challenge that the human race faced in its rise, and despite his intense urge to speed things along, he was forced to move at the pace dictated by the tower. Slowly, he saw humanity evolve, and from the Stone Ages they moved, step by step through the ages. The more this happened, the fewer Lex got chances to fight personally, though at some point Lex fell into a sort of trance. They were also stronger when they stood on land, for the ground acted as an external sensory organ for them, as well as a well of power. Their muscles were formed in a weaving structure, which allowed them to use much more strength than it actually seemed, and they were not limited in how they could move any limb. Lastly, and most importantly, it was basically immortal until the energy core hidden within its chest was destroyed, although Lex strongly suspected he could come up with many ways to kill it now. It was only back then, when he was weak, that he was limited to destroying its core to kill it. Oh, right, it also had an ability similar to Dragon's Might which was called coercion. It was extremely effective on him back in the day, though now he actually didn't even register it since it barely affected him. Was it a coincidence that this same race was now invading another realm? What role did they play in the realm wars? These were questions Lex didn't have an answer to right now, nor was he interested in knowing. Die, Lex said, and filled his voice with his mind-meld ability. As the emotionless voice carried over, the once mighty Craven, a foe that had literally frozen Lex still to the point where he could not move at all, died. Or rather, its spiritual energy was erased. But curiously, Lex could feel that its energy core in its chest immediately began to recover spiritual energy in its mind. He walked forward and with a single flick destroyed the energy core. Lex was reminded of the Craven Prince who had attacked him back in the Crystal Realm. Maybe after all of this was over, he should return and settle that grudge himself. He had not forgotten that the Craven Prince's attack caused Big Ben to lose his unborn child. Though Big Ben and his wife did not hold the Innkeeper responsible, and got over it, Lex did not. After all, the weight he bore on his shoulders was akin to that of a king. Chapter 1208 Destiny Anchor. After facing the first Craven, the challenges of the tower once again returned to those of combat, and they quickly became genuinely challenging. It was no longer a matter of one or two hits, but rather of a fight. The Craven, who had become his constant foes, proved themselves to be extremely worthy of the exceptionally deadly reputation they had in the Crystal Realm. Soon, not only did Lex go back from being able to defeat them easily, but he even went from being on the offensive to being on the defensive. For a moment, Lex even considered just ending the trial there and then. It was not like he was interested in the reward, and more importantly, he didn't want to waste time here. He had other things to do. But his instincts warned him otherwise. Since he was already inside the tower, his instincts were no longer being interfered with. It was not that he would be in danger if he tried to quit or didn't finish the tower, but rather that he would regret it. As soon as he reached that conclusion he thought for a moment. Was this the right time to pull out Naraka? Then he grit his teeth, and pulled out the butter knife, and put on the invincible tyrant mask. Upstada T from N, 0/V/LB and /.co/M. This was the first time in a long, long time that he was being pushed to the limits of his abilities, at least the abilities he could exhibit under the effects of the seal, and didn't need to fear the repercussion being death. As such, Lex was forced to use everything he had trained during the past 15 years, and his combat prowess began to evolve continuously. Each challenge he faced was tougher, and yet he rose to meet the challenge. If Z saw him now, he'd scoff again and claim that Lex was holding back. He could not be blamed for underestimating the rate at which he was actually growing stronger. He became more and more precise in his actions, planning each and every action, and just as Lex was getting into the flow of combat, he witnessed the end. The challenge was to prove that he deserved to exist, and that he deserved to survive the fate of destruction that had been rendered for an entire realm. This was not a challenge he could plan for. He could not put up a fake front. There were no plans. In fact, he could not even react to the challenge himself to begin with. It was one that would be answered on its own. Deep within Lex's body something reacted on his behalf. Lex's destiny was unordinary, he could deduce that much even if he did not understand destiny itself. But destiny was not nearly as irrefutable as many assumed. It was not nearly the shackle everyone always assumed, though it could also be that on occasion. When the challenge came, Lex felt oppressed in a way he hadn't experienced for a long time. He was severely weakened in front of the forces of annihilation that were targeting him, and he clearly felt the gap in power between himself and the blow that was about to land on him. All of that was irrelevant at the moment. The only thing relevant was that Lex's name was in the top of the guest registry, which afforded him many prizes in the form of anchors. Every guest who had a name in the top 10 of the registry had a destiny anchor. When the law of annihilation challenged him, from deep within Lex, for the first time, the effect of his destiny anchor manifested itself. The law of annihilation, at least at the level it was being displayed, was unworthy of challenging his destiny and his existence. Lex passed the challenge, even if he did not know how exactly he passed. At the same time, countless realms apart, the very being that appeared in the final vision of the realm before it was destroyed felt something. After a moment, it smiled. Interesting. 2 successful challengers. Chapter 1209 Not ready. Lex felt the overwhelming power of annihilation, and began to appreciate how genuinely awesome the power of laws could be. He knew that he could not genuinely be hurt during this challenge of the tower, probably, but even then, the power of annihilation felt like it would devour him. More importantly, if the application of the law didn't allow for a challenger to directly overcome the effects of the law, Lex knew this would have been the end of his climb in the tower. Yet the clear loophole was there, and so Lex survived some version of the attack that destroyed a whole realm. He was certain that it was not really on the same scale as the realm-destroying attack, but it was impressive nonetheless. It would have been even more impressive if he knew exactly which one of the many things inhabiting his body allowed him to do it. After passing through the final challenge, Lex was brought to a plain, simple room with a single pedestal in front of him. There was a note pinned to the side, and a golden ring on the pedestal. "Better luck next time," read the note very simply, and a hint of surprise flashed through Lex's eyes. He was fairly certain that he had zoomed through the levels in the tower, but apparently Giselle had been faster. It seemed like he had underestimated her. Lex picked up the golden ring and was not surprised to find it was a spatial ring. Within it was his prize, or maybe the ring was also a prize since its storage capacity was even larger than his spatial bangle. It was still nowhere near large enough to fit a planet, but a small country might not be an issue. More importantly, it contained a crystal ball filled with a liquid that was in a constant state of flux, not only rapidly changing colors, but also the texture of the liquid itself. All he needed to do was look at the ball to know that contained within were a portion of the laws of the destroyed realm, the very thing that the origin realm had been trying to absorb. He was not sure what benefits it would give, but he was certain that the Midnight Realm would be greatly enhanced from this. Every single participant in the tourney would receive immense support not only from their sponsors but from the Henali themselves. Yet the champion would directly get enough support to reach the Celestial Realm at the very least. Emperor Jotun himself was a former champion candidate, though he didn't quite make it in the end. Still, the value he was given by the Henali was evident, so the position of actual champions can easily be guessed. The best part was that one did not need to swear fealty to the Henali to receive the benefits of being champion. They would get it from virtue of being champion itself. "Mr. Lex, it looks like you're all set to move on, but there is a small issue. The entrance to the Trial of Eternity is not open yet. You will need to wait around 31 days before you can enter." If you don't wish to wait, you can enter one of the other tourney locations. No, this is fine. How will I be able to enter the trial after 31 days? Shall I return here? Not at all. You will be given your awards for completing the tournament in a stellar fashion, and one of them will be a key that will allow you to enter the trial. There is a complimentary, top-of-the-line refreshment and rehabilitation treatment prepared for you. By the time you are done, preparations for your award ceremony will be complete. Lex did not feel like he needed rehabilitation, but he was not in the mood to argue. He followed the receptionist as she led the way, his thoughts already focusing on the next steps. During the next 31 days, he could continue eliminating clones, while at the same time begin laying the groundwork to lure out his grandfather. At the same time, he would release the crystal ball containing laws into the Midnight Realm. He was looking forward to seeing how it improved. Lastly, he had to send Moon to the inn. He was not willing to stand by any longer. It was time for some drastic measures. Chapter 12:10 Clarity. Lex had experienced his fair share of rejuvenation treatments, and usually they involved being submerged in something. Whether it was warm waters filled with nutrients and vitamins that the body absorbs through the skin, or elixirs filled with the energies of life, or sands that soothed his muscle, or something else along those lines, he had done it all. But naturally, since this was arranged by the Hanali, its potency was in a category of its own. Lex was not led to a sleeping pod or resting chamber of some kind. Instead, he was led to a medical facility and asked to step into a ray of blue light that floated his body up in the air. The doctors in the room began to work on something on their tablets that Lex could not see, but soon he saw the machine activate, and a thin, white substance began to form a shell around him. At first Lex didn't understand what was happening, but when a clear liquid began to fill the shell, did he realize what it was. They were creating an eggshell around him, and he was the yolk of the egg, or well, close enough. As odd as the concept was, he didn't resist, and instead closed his eyes and allowed the shell to be complete. The liquid rose till it completely submerged him, and though Lex held his breath, he realized that his body was breathing through his skin regardless of the liquid surrounding him. He was trying to discern what other effects the liquid was having, yet the absence of any warmth seeping into him from his skin, or a cool sensation helping alleviate his fatigue, or basically any stimulus at all left it so that he could not tell what it was doing at all. He kept trying to tell what it was doing, but it took him a while to realize that there was no physical or mental sensation to indicate what was happening, but at some point, he had relaxed all his muscles. He relaxed his jaw, loosened his shoulders and let his legs rest instead of keeping them tight. But once that was done, Lex marveled at how relaxing a bit had helped clear his mind. Although his performance had not dipped due to whatever pressure was accumulating, the clarity he was afforded was remarkable. He gained a new perspective on the services they could offer at the inn, and made a mental note to add work retreats as special packages for the inn. He turned to look at the receptionist, who was standing aside the whole time, though her expression was once again very awkward. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lex, but there has been a small, unexpected situation," she said, being as polite as possible. She really could not afford to offend him, and yet she was continuously forced to do so. Even though she knew that she was secure in this place, confronted with someone so strong, logic went out the window when fear kicked in. Let me guess, the Henali were not prepared for someone to pass so quickly, so while they have the award prepared, they cannot pass it on themselves. The receptionist froze. He had guessed exactly right. Lex chuckled. "Don't worry. This is within my expectations. Just pass on the awards to me and let me know when I can enter the trial. I have a few other things I need to take care of." Of course, it was within his expectations. He was the one who had purposefully ensured that something like this would happen.